Hello and welcome back to the Jem Hawkes YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today, no matter what it is that you're doing. For our free wire tutorial today, I'd like to show you a really cool and super easy technique to create a fringe necklace using wire. Now it's a bar drop necklace, and once you get the key technique down, which is super easy, you can create the whole thing using a couple of simple moves. If you'd like to join me down at the board, I'll show you a little bit more closely what we're going to achieve together today, and also the materials you will need to make this with me. I've chosen to create the bar fringe necklace, utilising in this instance the accent beads are a mixed aquamarine in about 4mm, and then I have 2 sets of chakra beads. So in terms of the beads that you'll need, you would need 14 to generate the coloured section, and then you'd either need 63 beads that are all 4mm, or you could use smaller beads to create the drops. I've got some 4mm black agates that I'm going to show you with in a moment, and then you could use a different bead perhaps across the top, in which case it would be 49 of these beads that go on the downwards wire, and then 14 of whatever you choose to put on the bar. Now the reason I'm talking to you about the bar is that my small aquamarines here would only go on a 0.8 or 20 gauge wire, which means the bar is slightly flexible. So I have got a handful of alternatives to work with. So these are very large drill hole silver colour cube beads, and that's what I'm going to put on the bar in place of the 14 aquamarines at the top here. So we'll see what it looks like. One thing I would say is when you're choosing the beads to be the accent colour, don't go for anything too flashy if you are going to be using chakra colours, because we want to see those colours over and above your other bead choices. These are more the supporting cast, and these are your leading pieces. So I've got 14, 2 of each colourway there. So what I'm going to do is just clear the board of these bits and pieces and show you the main technique. So if I just pop this up into the corner, we can get cracking. Now let's talk about wire. If it's possible for you to do so, working from the reel will mean that you lose the least amount of wire. However, for me, when I'm on the board here with the camera just a couple of inches above my hands, it's really very tricky to do so. I'm going to assume that you want to work from the reel, and therefore this end, we're just going to pretend that's still attached. So what you would need to do is start with your purple bead. In this instance I've got a little amethyst, and then we're going to add 1 of our supporting cast beads. In this instance it's going to be one of these tiny black agates. I'm going to get this out of the way for now so I don't knock it flying. So assuming that we are connected to the wire at the far end over here, this is our cut end. What we would need to do is put our supporting bead on first, and for the end of the fringe, all the way over at the side, we're going to put 1 supporting cast bead on, and then 1 of our coloured or featured beads. Now you don't have to follow the chakra colours as I have done. You could simply have a different colour or a different size bead to the remainder of those supporting beads. It's entirely up to you. So to start with, we're going to go for 1 supporting bead, 1 featured bead, and then we're going to go for 2 supporting, and all the way until you get to that central drop where we have 7 supporting beads, and then I've doubled up on the red or the root chakra colour. Now you don't have to follow that explicitly if you don't want to. You could just go for a single bead, but because I used 2 chakra packs, I thought I'd add that second drop in. And the graduation of size is really cool as well. I like that extra drop in the middle. Now on the demonstration piece I have on the board here, I have simply created open and closable loops at the bottom and at the top. What I'm going to show you now is a much more interesting and secure way to put a stopper at the base of those beads and to create a wrapped loop up at the top. So let's get our beads into position there on the wire that it leads away to that reel, and what we're going to do is turn a double coil down at the bottom. So right at the very end of my rounder nose pliers, right at the very tip of that wire, I'm just going to spin that around. You'll see that my pliers fell off literally 3 times there. That's because we're right on the very, very end. So I've made my first small coil shape. What I'm going to do is just run that around until I have 2 passes of wire rotating around from that start point, like so. Once I've got those 2 passes of wire, now this is 0.8mm or 20 gauge wire. Now I've defined this wire to be used because it's what fits on the bead drill hole, or what the bead drill hole fits on rather. Now if you can get a heavier gauge wire through your beads, all the better, but this is what I had to work with and it does work. Anything lighter than that is going to be a risk. Once you've got that double coil sorted, what we're going to do is push the coil away and create an angle up above there, and then I'm just going to straighten that out slightly. Now you do want the angle to come away as if it's come from the centre of the coil, so you might need to just play with that until it sits how you want it to. Obviously you won't have a camera over and above. Once you've got that double coil in position, we're going to slide down those beads that we're using. Now for this piece, which you will see completed at the end of the video today, I'm going to now create a wrapped loop in a 90-degree opposition to that coil. So I'm going to pop my pliers over the surface of the wire, and where we've got the coil flat to the work surface, I'm going to bring the wire up at 90 degrees. So if I twist that over sideways, you can see we're going to create a wrapped loop up at the top in opposition to that coil. Now obviously at this point I'm going to have to move the wire around. It is achievable whilst it's connected to the coil, it's just not achievable on camera. So I'm going to now pop my round nose pliers into position and rotate the wire around until I get a lovely loop shape up at the top. And what I will endeavour to do is try and recreate the distance between the top of my supporting bead and where that bend occurs. If I can try to get that to be exactly the same every time, the finished product will look all the much more neat and tidy. And I'm going to take that tail around. As I say, it is entirely possible to do this whilst it is still connected to the reel. Just a little bit trickier if there is a camera involved. So I've got a couple of coils going around the neck of the design there. It's a basic wrapped loop. I'm going to continue using this cut piece of wire many times. If you want to cut sections of wire, try cutting 10 or 12 inch lengths and you'll use most of it. There will be minimal wastage. What we need to do is make sure that we're happy with that coil down at the base, and then that we're happy with the neatness of the coil around the neck, and that our wrapped loop up at the top is neat and tidy, the cut end is tidied away, and that they are at 90 degrees opposition to each other. So I'm going to pop that down for a second whilst I show you the easier way in which this copper variation was made. So I'm just going to take again the same section of wire. This is 0.8 or 20 gauge again. I'm just going to give that a quick smooth to make it nice and fluid and smooth. And I'm just going to repeat what I've done there basically, but in the slightly more simple format. So again, you would need to pop on your supporting cast member bead first, and then you would pop on your featured bead, hold those into position, and we would just turn a loop around on the end, and then pop back in with those bent chain nose pliers, like so, until you've created what looks for all the world like the end of an eye pin. Now you can tidy that up. Once that is in position, I'm going to give that the world's firmest squish. You can make it slightly flat if you want to, before sliding my beads into position. Just going to flip this around. Now for the design I made over here, I kept my tiny little loops at either end in the same orientation. I like how when you're wearing it, you're seeing the front of that loop, like it's just a nice smooth section of wire. If you turn it sideways, you get a loop shape, which is absolutely fine. The choice is yours, but the way I've made this one is that the loops are in the same orientation. So I'm just going to take a second to see that the cut side of the loop is above, and the side of the loop that is adjoined to the main section of wire is below. So I want to repeat that because I want the connected side to always face forwards. So I'm just going to draw a slight angle coming away forwards. It's about a 45-degree angle. Before rotating around with those pliers again, I'm just going to draw that underneath. There's always something that gets caught on my board. Trying to keep those loops a similar size will be handy. So I've set that loop into position. I now need to just trim away. This design makes up so quickly. The thing that takes the most time for me is actually getting the beads on the wire. So at this stage you're going to look very, very carefully before you make that cut. And then you will take a moment to make sure that that loop is sealed up, and then you give it a nice squish and a flatten down. So you can make this up quite rapidly, but it does pay to squeeze both of those ends to make them strong. So if I just pop this in for a second, you can see how that's made in exactly the same way. And then on this design, you've just got slightly more fanciful, and at the top end a little bit more secure, because we're working in a lighter gauge wire to fit through the drill holes of the beads. It does pay to have that level of security. So I'm going to show you now how to build this up, and then we'll assemble it all together in just a moment. So when you get down to that central drop, you've worked your way up, adding an extra accent bead every time above your coloured bead. When we get down to that central one, you've got a choice. You can either have a single one in position, or like I'm going to put 2 in. So I'm just going to show you that now. So I've pre-threaded the beads in the correct order on the wire. So I have 7, which is the maximum number of accent beads that I've used in my design, and then I'm popping on 2 of those coloured beads. So all we will do here is a double coil, exactly as we have done all the way through. It's a bit chilly here today, so my fingers aren't really working. I'm going to create a double coil, and then I'm going to pop those pliers in and twist that coil so that it sits centrally, like so. Smooth the wire above that coil, and then drop all the beads down into position. So you can see that they're going to graduate quite nicely and dramatically in the centre, before popping my beads on the same plane as that coil. Not my beads, my pliers, sorry. Draw a forwards bend, 90 degrees or so, and then we're going to create a wrapped loop up at the top. So you can rotate your round nose pliers or your bail makers around, whichever works for you. I've gone for a reasonable size because I think I might add in different beads up at the top. Grip hold of the circular form and then wrap a couple of times around the neck section. Once you've got your number of wraps, trying to replicate it as you go. Let's get that excess wire out of the way. I'm going to show you a two-handed technique now for just finishing off that wrapped loop, which is to support the wrapped loop with one set of flat-facing pliers, and then chase the coiled wire around with another pair of flat-facing. In this case, they're both chain nose pliers. So I'm going to take my pliers back out of the way and drop the next bead bar into position. So I've created each of those drops in turn with a growing number going down one side and then a decreasing number coming up the other side, with the longest drop in the centre. Now I'm just using the chakra colours because I love working with them. You don't have to obviously have the same number or the same colour variations. You can absolutely make this work in your design ideals. So let's pop back down to the board and see how this is going to work up. I've decided that I'm going to use a stronger wire for the bar section of my necklace. I'm going to build up the gaps in between each of those drops using these tiny little cube beads. They're again about 4mm, and I've gone for silver colour. So if you look down at the board now, I will show you how that's all going to build up. I have now a bar of wire. This is around about 6 or 7 inches, and this is 1.25mm or 16 gauge wire. Now, to make my life ever so slightly easier, so that things don't go falling off, I'm going to start at one end with a wrapped loop. So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use the box joint of my pliers. These are beadle-on pliers. Around about 1.25 inches from one end, I'm going to create a right angle bend. Now, that's just me being lazy and sharing lazy person tip with you. I'm then going to use my round nose pliers to create a circular form. And I'm just going to leave that in a circular form for now. In a moment, I'm going to add in some chain so that I can create a full bracelet, a full necklace. and then that means that we don't have any jump rings causing any issues as we go. So I'm going to show you how to just slide these on in the correct order. I've got my little silver cube beads. If you wanted to use the agates, or the same bead that we used to create the accents on each of those drops, you'll need to use a finer wire. These simply do not fit on my heavier gauge wire. So that is why I've elected to use something different. Now for these you would need to have, I think, 14 overall. So I'm going to slide one of the accent beads into position before I start with the lowest number of accent beads. Now you can, if you want to, ensure that all your spirals go in the same direction. So this starts and it moves clockwise. If it's your attention to detail that you want to do that, then you absolutely can. Now because I started with an accent bead, I've made sure that I've finished with an accent bead. Symmetry is something that's kind of important in a design like this. So I'm going to show you now how to add in some chain on either end of that bar and how to give it a little bit of shaping. You can keep it completely flat if you want to, but I like to see just a little bit of a nice swooshy curve down at the bottom because it splays the ends of those little bar drops out. So what I'm going to do now is just allow the beads to sit in position. And I'm going to try to get a similar space on either end. So I'm just going to push that bar into position to make sure that I'm not leaving any unnecessary gaps. I'm going to leave quite a small amount of space on the left because it's quite a heavy wire. You only really need 2 little turns to make that nice and secure. So I'm going to push the wire up at the far end, and again with my round nose pliers. Now what you see here is I've made a bend that isn't very sharp at all. Now it shouldn't really matter because we're going to turn that into a loop, but if that bothers you, you can just take it past where it needs to sit and back again, and you get a slightly sharper bend. It's not much, but it's quite a heavy wire to work with. So again, round nose pliers, drawing the wire all the way around until it turns into a wrapped loop. So all that remains is to bring those tails all the way around the core wire. I'll show you that on one end, but the first thing I'm going to do is just get my flush cutters and trim these 2 ends to a similar kind of length, like so, and that's got quite a sharp end on it, so I'm just going to trim that away as well. So I've got a couple of short lengths of spare chain just hanging around. I'm going to show you very quickly. You just slide one of those links through the chain, and then we're going to support the loop shape and draw that tail around. What I'm going to do is draw it around twice before I add the chain in at the other end to make sure that I can achieve the same number of wraps, because you might not need all of that wire. We left a reasonably small gap, so let me just show you that. Actually, it won't take many moments. Pop that second length of chain in and then support the loop shape whilst you draw that tail all the way around. Now I think probably that's more than enough. That's plenty. So what I'm going to do is take the end of the wire just over the top slightly and trim away at the back, but I'll do that in a moment. So it's just a case of making this as neat and as symmetrical as possible. And to give it a little bit of shape, it's quite a heavy wire, so if you give it shape it will probably stay that way. Let me just pop that down on the board with everything splaying out neatly. And you can just add whatever kind of closure you want on the end. It will look really, really lovely in wear. Well, I shall just finish off those wrapped loops on the bar assembly itself. I've shown you that so many times you must get bored of it. So what I will do once I've finished is I will take a photograph of it and you can see that in just a moment. Thanks for hanging out with me here today on the Jem Hawkes YouTube channel. Have yourself a very beautiful day indeed. See you soon.